a minute or two now. They just witnessed that whole thing. Hi, Instagram. Apologies for that. Maybe I'll just, nobody's in there yet. Maybe I'll end the video. Oh, hello, YouTube. Yay, now YouTube is live. That's exciting. Just gonna, we had a little technical issue after I'd hit live on the Instagram. So I'm just gonna restart the Instagram. So that's nice. Welcome to the Isolated Literary Society presents Daily Austen with Sarah Shay. That is to say, me reading Emma a couple of chapters a day. That's what we're working with. I did Pride and Prejudice first. If for some reason you're here and you haven't seen the other videos, you can go back to day 1 and day 2 if you'd like to catch up on the book, or you can just watch this one because you like having someone reading a Regency novel in the background and you're not really paying attention to the story. They're both totally valid options. Oh, wow. Somebody came into the stream and then left. Rude. Okay, so today we will be reading chapter 5. Wait, is that right? Yes. No, chapter 6. Read chapter 5 yesterday, where Mr. Knightley and Mrs. Weston have a protracted argument about Emma. Yes. Now we will be moving on to chapter 6. Emma could not feel a doubt of having given Harriet's fancy a proper direction, and raised the gratitude of her young vanity to a very good purpose, for she found her decidedly more sensible than before of Mr. Elton's being a remarkably handsome man, with most agreeable manners, and as she had no hesitation in following up the assurance of his admiration by agreeable hints. She was soon pretty confident of creating as much liking on Harriet's side as there could be any occasion for. Sorry, I just had to make sure it looked like GarageBand had stopped recording, but it hadn't. So thanks, GarageBand, for freaking me out for a second. Okay. There could be any occasion for. She was quite convinced of Mr. Elton's being in the fairest way of falling in love, if not in love already. He had no scruple with regard to him. She had no scruple with regard to him. He talked of Harriet and praised her so warmly that she could not suppose anything wanting which a little time would not add. His perception of the striking improvement of Harriet's manner since her introduction to Hartfield was not one of the least agreeable proofs of his growing attachment. "You have given Miss Smith all that she required," said he. "You have made her graceful and easy. She was a beautiful creature when she came to you, but, in my opinion, the attractions you have added are infinitely superior to what she received from nature." "I am glad you think I have been useful to her, but Harriet only wanted drawing out, and receiving a few, very few hints. She had all the natural grace of sweetness, of temper, and artlessness in herself. I have done very little." "If it were admissible to contradict a lady," said gallant Mr. Elton. "I have, perhaps, given her a little more decision of character, have taught her to think on points which had not fallen in her way before." "Exactly so. That is what principally strikes me. So much superadded decision of character. Skillful has been the hand." "Great has been the pleasure, I am sure. I never met with a disposition more truly amiable." "I have no doubt of it." And it was spoken with a sort of sighing animation which had a vast deal of the lover. She was not less pleased another day with the manner in which he seconded a sudden wish of hers, to have Harriet's picture. "Did you ever have your likeness taken, Harriet?" said she. "Did you ever sit for your picture?" Harriet was on the point of leaving the room, and only stopped to say, with some very interesting naivete, "Oh, dear, no, never." No sooner was she out of sight than Emma exclaimed, "What an exquisite possession a good picture of her would be! I would give any money for it. I almost long to attempt her likeness myself. You do not know it, I dare say, but 2 or 3 years ago I had a great passion for taking likenesses, and attempted several of my friends, and was thought to have a tolerable eye in general. But from one cause or another I gave it up in disgust. But really, I could almost venture, if Harriet would sit to me, it would be such a delight to have her picture." "Let me entreat you," cried Mr. Elton. "It would indeed be a delight. Let me entreat you, Miss Woodhouse, to exercise so charming a talent in favor of your friend. I know what your drawings are. How could you suppose me ignorant? Is not this room rich in specimens of your landscapes and flowers? And has not Mrs. Weston some inimitable figure pieces in her drawing room at Randall's? Yes, good man, thought Emma. But what has all that to do with taking likenesses? You know nothing of drawing. Don't pretend to be in raptures about mine. Keep your raptures for Harriet's face. Well, if you give me such kind encouragement, Mr. Elton, I'm sure I shall try what I can do. Harriet's features are very delicate, which makes a likeness difficult, and yet there is a peculiarity in the shape of the eye and the lines about the mouth which one ought to catch. Exactly so. The shape of the eye, the lines about the mouth. I have not a doubt of your success. Pray attempt it. As you will do it, will indeed, to use your own words, be an exquisite possession. But I am afraid, Mr. Elton, Harriet will not like to sit. She thinks so little of her own beauty. Did not you observe her manner of answering me? How completely it meant, why should my picture be drawn? Oh, yes, I observed it, I assure you. It was not lost on me. But still, I cannot imagine she would not be persuaded. Mr. Elton's really fun to figure out a voice for it because he's basically Mr. Collins, but more likable.
Yeah.
He's just better at hiding his, superciliousness.
I didn't realize how weird he sounded. It always...
Yeah. You read it and it's he's so over the top and oh yes, exactly. Everything you say, Emma, is absolutely correct. I totally agree with every specific point.
But you can also see how she's reading it she wants to read into it.
No spoilers.
But you can see how she's reading it as he's into Harriet.
Yeah, I honestly wish that I could read this book for the first time without having seen any of the adaptations.
Yeah. To
see how I read the character.
Yeah.
Because I honestly don't remember. Well, I never got to see it because I've seen Clueless. Yeah. And I knew it was based on Emma.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the same.
So at least
I knew kind of what Elton was all about.
Yeah. That's right, because he has the same name.
Yes, exactly. The only character that gets the same name.
Yes.
I guess having a rich boy in Beverly Hills in the 90s named Elton just feels right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And her name was Cher and Dion, so it kind of goes with the sort of him being Elton. I think that they probably just went, it's too perfect. Yeah. We have to keep it.
Yeah.
Oh. Harriet was soon back again, and the proposal almost immediately made, and she had no scruples which could stand many minutes against the earnest pressing of both the others. Emma wished to go to work directly, and therefore produced the portfolio containing her various attempts at portraits, for not one of them had ever been finished, that they might decide together on the best size for Harriet. Her many beginnings were displayed. Miniatures, half-lengths, whole-lengths, pencil, crayon, and watercolors had all been tried in turn. She had always wanted to do everything, and had made more progress both in drawing and music than many might have done with so little labor as she would ever submit to. She played and sang and drew in almost every style, but steadiness had always been wanting, and in nothing had she approached the degree of excellence which she would have been glad to command and ought not to have failed of. Whoa, hit me. Just constantly trying new things and then being that was okay, but it's not as good as I wanted it to be immediately. Right. So move on to the next thing. Yeah. That is one of the few parts of Emma who, as a person, is relatable. She was not much deceived as to her own skill, either as an artist or a musician, but she was not unwilling to have others deceived, and sorry to know her reputation for accomplishment often higher than it deserved. There was merit in every drawing, in the least finished, perhaps the most. Her style was spirited, but had there been much less, or had there been 10 times more, the delight and admiration of her two companions would have been the same. They were both in ecstasies. A likeness pleases everybody, and Miss Woodhouse's performances must be capital. No great variety of faces for you, said Emma. I had only my own family to study from. There is my father, another of my father, but the idea of sitting for his picture made him so nervous that I could only take him by stealth, neither of them very like, therefore. Mrs. Weston again, and again, and again, you see. Dear Mrs. Weston, always my kindest friend on every occasion. She would sit whenever I asked her. There is my sister, and really quite her own little elegant figure, and the face not unlike. I should have made a good likeness of her if she would have sat longer, but she was in such a hurry to have me draw her 4 children that she would not be quiet. Then here come all my attempts at 3 of those 4 children. There they are, Henry and John and Bella, from one end of the sheet to the other, and any one of them might do for any one of the rest. She was so eager to have them drawn that I could not refuse, but there is no making children of 3 or 4 years old stand still, you know, nor can it be very easy to take any likeness of them, beyond the air and complexion, unless they are coarser featured than any of my mamma's children ever were. Here is my sketch of the 4th, who was a baby. I took him as he was sleeping on the sofa, and it is as strong a likeness of his cockade as you would wish to see. I don't know what cockade means in that context. He had nestled down his head most conveniently. That's very like. I am rather proud of little George. The corner of the sofa is very good. Then here is my last, unclosing a pretty sketch of a gentleman in small size, whole length. My last and my best, my brother, Mr. John Knightley. This did not want much of being finished when I put it away in a pet, and vowed I would never take another likeness. I could not help being provoked, for after all my pains, and when I had really made a very good likeness of it, Mrs. Weston and I were quite agreed in thinking it very like. Only too handsome, too flattering, but that was a fault on the right side. After all this came poor dear Isabella's cold approbation of, yes, it was a little like, but to be sure it did not do him justice. We had had a great deal of trouble in persuading him to sit at all. It was made a great favor of, and altogether it was more than I could bear, and so I would never finish it. To have it apologized over as an unfavorable likeness to every morning visitor in Brunswick Square. And as I said, I did then forswear ever drawing anybody again. But for Harriet's sake, or rather for my own, and as there are no husbands and wives in the case at present, I will break my resolution now. Mr. Elton seemed very properly struck and delighted by the idea, and was repeating, no husbands and wives in the case at present, indeed, as you observe. Exactly so. No husbands and wives. With so interesting a consciousness that Emma began to consider whether she had not better leave them together at once. But as she wanted to be drawing, the declaration must wait a little longer. It's just repeating everything she says. Oh, hello, Teresa. Yeah, craggy features are way easier than smooth, cute faces. It's true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that does make sense. It gives you lines to draw.
Yeah, Teresa would know.
Is she an artist?
An excellent artist. Oh, she's marvelous.
She takes wonderful portraits.
That drawing over there by the thing of the tree with the little children in it. I mean, it's a very it's sort of I think Teresa would say it's a very rather informal one. She has, but I really like it, which is why I bought it from her. Nice. But the album cover for my new audiobook is also by her, which I don't know if you saw it, but I think I showed it to you the day she sent it to me because I was so excited.
Yeah.
I was showing it to everybody. But the mandolin with like the leaves and the vines all over it. Mm-hmm. So cool. Anyway, I'll get back. I'll stop singing Teresa's praises like I'm Mr. Elton. Just as you observed, Teresa, exactly so. She had soon fixed on the size and sort of portrait. It was to be a whole length in watercolors, like Mr. John Knightley's, and was destined, if she could please herself, to hold a very honorable station over the mantelpiece. The sitting began, and Harriet, smiling and blushing, and afraid of not keeping her attitude and countenance, presented a very sweet mixture of youthful expression to the steady eyes of the artist. But there was no doing anything, with Mr. Elton fidgeting behind her and watching every touch. She gave him credit for stationing himself where he might gaze and gaze again without offense, but was really obliged to put an end to it and request him to place himself elsewhere. It then occurred to her to employ him in reading. If he would be so good as to read to them, it would be a kindness indeed. It would amuse away the difficulties of her part and lessen the irksomeness of Miss Smith. Mr. Elton was only too happy. Harriet listened, and Emma drew in peace. She would allow him to be still frequently coming to look. Anything less would certainly have been too little in a lover, and he was ready at the smallest intermission of the pencil to jump up and see the progress and be charmed. There was no being displeased with such an encourager, for his admiration made him discern a likeness almost before it was possible. She could not respect his eye, but his love and his complacence were unexceptionable. Yeah, Teresa says this is pre-audiobooks. You just had to ask one of your friends to sit in the corner and read. Much as I am doing for all of you. Yay. I'm just sitting in my corner of the internet and reading to you.
while I am drawing.
Yeah. And my roommate Carolyn is, in fact, drawing. All right, hold on. I'll take this pause to show everyone the illustration of Mr. Elton leaping up to see the progress. This is interesting. I thought it specifically said that Emma was blonde.
Oh.
But in this drawing, they've given her dark hair. It seems like she's always blonde in adaptations.
Well, except for the Kate Beckinsale one. But yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
All the others.
Well,
it's fairly old. I think that one's from the 80s. It was when Kate was very young, so.
Yeah. I would imagine so.
Yeah.
All right.
But all the others.
Teresa said she's working on some. She does sculpting as well, like Sculpey. She does little figurines. You know that little figurine I have on the shelf of the rabbit with like knee-length, like knee-high stockings on. Uh-huh. That's another Teresa original. Okay. Just pointing out all my Teresa art I have in the house.
Nice.
So this is perfect. You're drawing, you're coloring. She's kneading Sculpey.
It is nice to listen to something being read while you're doing something.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I really enjoy audiobooks, and that's why I kind of wanted to do this. I thought it'd be sort of fun. All right. I'm basically making an audiobook, but a little bit at a time and also live. Oh, hello, Erin. Erin's in the Instagram. All right, where was I? The sitting was altogether very satisfactory. She was quite enough pleased with the first day's sketch to wish to go on. There was no want of likeness. She had been fortunate in the attitude, and as she meant to throw in a little improvement to the figure, to give a little more height and considerably more elegance, she had great confidence of its being in every way a pretty drawing at last, and of its filling its destined place with credit to them both. A standing memorial of the beauty of one, the skill of the other, and the friendship of both, with as many other agreeable associations as Mr. Elton's very promising attachment was likely to add. Harriet was to sit again the next day, and Mr. Elton, just as he ought, entreated for the permission of attending and reading to them again. By all means, we shall be most happy to consider you as one of the party. The same civilities and courtesies, the same success and satisfaction took place on the morrow, and accompanied the whole progress of the picture, which was rapid and happy. Everybody who saw it was pleased, and Mr. Elton was in continual raptures, and defended it through every criticism. Miss Woodhouse, hold on, wrong character. Miss Woodhouse has given her friend the only beauty she wanted, observed Mrs. Weston to him, not in the least suspecting she was addressing a lover. The expression of the eye is most correct, but Miss Smith has not those eyebrows and eyelashes. It is the fault of her face that she has them not. Do you think so? Replied he. I cannot agree with you. It appears to me a most perfect resemblance in every feature. I never saw such a likeness in my life. We must allow for the effect of shade, you know. You have made her too tall, Emma, said Mr. Knightley. Emma knew that she had, but would not own it, and Mr. Elton warmly added, Oh, no, certainly not too tall. Not in the least too tall. Consider she is sitting down, which naturally presents a different, which in short gives exactly the idea, and the proportions must be preserved, you know. Proportions, foreshortening. Oh, no, it gives one exactly the idea of such a height as Miss Smith. Exactly so, indeed.
Art terms.
He's so eager to agree with everything that he can't even finish his sentences.
He's like, art words.
Things, stuff. I just
foreshortening, shading.
Just look, it's perfect, and just go with me on this. It is very pretty, said Mr. Woodhouse. So prettily done, just as your drawings always are, my dear. I do not know anybody who draws so well as you do. The only thing I do not thoroughly like is that she seems to be sitting out of doors, with only a little shawl over her shoulders, and it makes one think she must catch cold.
Yes.
But, my dear papa, it is supposed to be summer, a warm day in summer. Look at the tree. But it is never safe to sit out of doors, my dear. You, sir, may say anything, cried Mr. Elton, but I must confess that I regard it as the most happy thought, the placing Miss Smith out of doors, and the tree is touched with such inimitable spirit, and any other situation would have been much less in character. The naivete of Miss Smith's manners, and altogether, oh, it is most admirable. I cannot keep my eyes from it. I never saw such a likeness. He's like the midway point. Like all the desire to be agreeable of Mr. Bingley with all the lack of sense of Mr. Collins.
Yeah.
That's Mr. Elton.
Yeah, it's true.
He has that up on Mr. Collins in terms of ridiculous clergyman.
Yes.
In Jane Austen novels, that he is at least trying to please people.
Yeah.
He's not only trying to please his benefactor.
Yeah.
As Mr. Collins is.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He is an idiot.
But he is an idiot. They are both idiots. Boy, Jane Austen must not have thought much of clergymen. Oh no, but Mr. Tilney is a clergyman. And he's
yeah.
He's
I mean,
lovely.
her father was one.
Maybe something changed between Northanger Abbey and the other books that she was like,
I'm guessing.
Wait a minute.
I'm guessing that these
what
characters,
if clergymen are actually awful?
I'm guessing that these characters are based on at least one person she met. Maybe not like.
Teresa just reminded me that Alan Cumming is Mr. Elton in the 90s one, I think, right?
Oh.
Is that the one you're referring to? That sounds right. I mean, she said, so cringe, yet I can't unsee Alan Cumming in the chat. And I went, oh, I can immediately envision him as Mr. Elton.
Yeah.
He must be, because that's the only other one I've seen.
I was trying to remember who.
What a perfect Mr. Elton.
In that one, yeah.
What a perfect. Oh, the guy in the new movie is pretty good. And he did a decent job. Maybe a little too silly. There was a certain style to the movie that kind of agreed with that decision.
Yeah.
Might have not been his decision. It might have been the director's.
I mean, everything is ultimately the director's decision.
Well, I don't know. I agree with that.
I mean, if it gets into the movie.
Well, there's a difference between an actor doing something that the director has told them to do and the actor doing their own thing and the director saying, yes, I like it. Yeah. Let's keep it.
Yeah.
Anyway. The next thing wanted was to get the picture framed, and here were a few difficulties. It must be done directly, it must be done in London, and the order must go through the hands of some intelligent person whose taste could be depended on, and Isabella, the usual doer of all commissions, must not be applied to, because it was December, and Mr. Woodhouse could not bear the idea of her stirring out of her house in the fogs of December. But no sooner was the distress known to Mr. Elton than it was removed. His gallantry was always on the alert. Might he be trusted with the commission, what infinite pleasure should he have in executing it? He could ride to London at any time. It was impossible to say how much he should be gratified by being employed on such an errand. She does the thing in this book, which she didn't do in Pride and Prejudice, at least, where she'll put something in quotes, and it's clearly meant to be in the character's voice, but it's not in the first person.
Oh.
Like that. This next part, like, this is clearly supposed to be in Emma's words, and it has quotes, but it's, he was too good. She could not endure the thought, rather than you're too good. I can't endure the thought. It's a bit confusing.
Yeah, that is, I wonder if that was just a convention.
Yeah, it might have been a thing at the time, but she doesn't do it in Pride and Prejudice.
Huh.
Anyway, he was too good. She could not endure the thought. She would not give him such a troublesome office for the world. Brought on the desired repetition of entreaties and assurances, and a very few minutes settled the business. Yeah, Teresa's an internal dialogue, but I feel like it to be what they are saying. Internal monologue, yeah. I think it's supposed to be what they're actually saying, because she says that, and it says, that brought on the desired repetition of entreaties. Anyway, it's just I think it's just a weird convention from the time that's just, we don't do anymore, and so it's a little confusing. Mr. Elton was to take the drawing to London, choose the frame, and give the directions, and Emma thought she could so pack it as to ensure its safety without much incommoding him, while he seemed most fearful of not being incommoded enough. What a precious deposit, said he with a tender sigh as he received it.
Oh, God.
This man is almost too gallant to be in love, thought Emma. I should say so, but that I suppose there may be 100 different ways of being in love. He is an excellent young man and will suit Harriet exactly. It will be an exactly so, as he says himself. But he does sigh and languish, and study for compliments rather more than I could endure as a principal. I come in for a pretty good share as a second, but it is his gratitude on Harriet's account. If only. All right.
You tell yourself that.
Chapter 7. Quick water break.
Chapstick break.
And I'm still doing good. Thanks for looking out for me.
You're maid of honor here.
Chapter 7. The very day of Mr. Elton's going to London produced a fresh occasion for Emma's services towards her friend. Harriet had been at Hartfield, as usual, soon after breakfast, and after a time had gone home to return again to dinner. She returned, and sooner than had been talked of. She returned, and sooner than had been talked of, and with an agitated, hurried look, announcing something extraordinary to have happened, which she was longing to tell. Half a minute brought it all out. She had heard. Okay, I'm gonna do a little jaw thing. Maybe having a hard time with words at the moment. All right. I should do some. I should be doing some like a red leather, yellow leather. I should be doing some acting exercises before I start these.
That's right. Yeah.
That would be a professional thing to do, I suppose. She had heard, as soon as she got back to Mrs. Goddard's, that Mr. Martin had been there an hour before, and finding she was not at home, not particularly expected, had left a little parcel for her from one of his sisters, and gone away. And on opening this parcel, she had actually found, besides the 2 songs which she had lent Elizabeth to copy, a letter to herself, and this letter was from him, from Mr. Martin, and contained a direct proposal of marriage. Who could have thought it? She was so surprised she did not know what to do. Yes, quite a proposal of marriage, and a very good letter, at least she thought so. And he wrote as if he really loved her very much, but she did not know, and so she had come as fast as she could to ask Miss Woodhouse what she should do. I've decided I'm going to do those in the person's voice, even though it feels a little awkward.
Yeah.
Emma was half ashamed of her friend for seeming so pleased and so doubtful. Upon my word, she cried, the young man is determined not to lose anything for want of asking. He will connect himself well if he can. Will you read the letter? Cried Harriet. Pray do. I'd rather you would. Elizabeth was not sorry to be pressed. She read and was surprised. The style of the letter was much above her expectation. There were not merely no grammatical errors, but as a composition it would not have disgraced a gentleman. The language, though plain, was strong and unaffected, and the sentiments it conveyed very much to the credit of the writer. It was short, but expressed good sense, warm attachment, liberality, propriety, even delicacy of feeling. She paused over it, while Harriet stood anxiously watching for her opinion, with a well, and was last forced to add, is it a good letter, or is it too short? Yes, indeed. Very good letter, replied Emma, rather slowly. So good a letter, Harriet, that, everything considered, I think one of his sisters must have helped him.
Wow.
I can hardly imagine the young man whom I saw talking with you the other day could express himself so well. Yes, it couldn't possibly be wrong, Emma, or couldn't be the case that, Emma, you yourself were incorrect in your read of him. No. It must be that one of his sisters helped him write the letter.
Yeah.
Just bend right over backward to justify your assumptions about him.
Seriously.
I can hardly imagine the young man whom I saw talking with you the other day could express himself so well, if left quite to his own powers, and yet it is not the style of a woman. No, certainly, it is too strong and concise, not diffuse enough for a woman. No doubt he is a sensible man, and I suppose may have a natural talent for, thinks strongly and clearly, and when he takes a pen in his hand, his thoughts naturally find proper words. It is so with some men. Yes, I understand the sort of mind. Vigorous, decided, with sentiments to a certain point, not coarse. A better written letter, Harriet, returning it, than I had expected. Stage direction in parentheses in the middle of a sentence. Weird choice in a novel, but okay.
Yeah.
Well, said the still waiting Harriet, well, and what shall I do? What shall you do? In what respect? Do you mean with regard to this letter? Yes. But what are you in doubt of? You must answer it, of course, and speedily. Well, yes, but what shall I say? Dear Miss Woodhouse, do advise me. Oh, no. The letter had much better be all your own. You will express yourself very properly, I am sure. There is no danger of your not being intelligible, which is the first thing. Your meaning must be unequivocal. No doubts or demurs, and such expressions of gratitude and concern for the pain you are inflicting as propriety requires will present themselves unbidden to your mind, I am persuaded. You need not be prompted to write with the appearance of sorrow for his disappointment. You think I ought to refuse him, then? Said Harriet, looking down. Ought to refuse him? My dear Harriet, what do you mean? Are you in any doubt as to that? I thought, but I beg your pardon, perhaps I have been under a mistake. I certainly have been misunderstanding you, if you feel in doubt as to the purport of your answer. I had imagined you were consulting me only as to the wording of it. Harriet was silent. With a little reserve of manner, Emma continued. You mean to return a favorable answer, I correct? No, I do not. That is not. I do not mean. What shall I do? What would you advise me to do? Pray, dear Miss Woodhouse, tell me what I ought to do.
Seriously.
How about what do you want to do, Harriet? What does Harriet want?
Lady Catherine will never know.
I must say, this scene plays out differently in the recent film. I remember that pretty clearly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it seems obvious in this scene. It really seems like Emma thinks she's done away with her attraction to Mr. Merton. That's already done with. She seems more genuine than Emma actually does think. Oh, I thought you were just asking me how to word it. Do you really not know how to answer? Like whether you should say yes or no? But in the scene, it reads very much like she's still managing Harriet's attraction to Mr. Martin and leading her by the nose to saying no.
Right. Yeah.
Which, I don't know. Could have been Jane Austen's intent in this scene, or it could have just been in the movie. They needed to do it that way because they didn't have screen time to have her fully establish that she thought Mr. Martin was a thing of the past. I don't know. All of her comments about, oh, I am sure she's in love with Mr. Elton, and I'm sure Mr. Elton's in love with her. It's just a matter of getting them there. That it's harder to convey all that when you don't have the inner dialogue. Or inner monologue.
Yeah.
Okay. I shall not give you any advice, Harriet. I will have nothing to do with it. This is a point which you must settle with your own feelings. I had no notion that he liked me so very much, said Harriet, contemplating the letter. For a little while, Emma persevered in her silence, but beginning to apprehend the bewitching flattery of that letter might be too powerful, she thought it best to say, I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. If she can hesitate as to yes, she ought to say no directly. It's like the opposite of Charlotte Lucas's advice.
Yeah.
in Pride and Prejudice. We'll just say yes. I mean, you can figure it all out later.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just say yes in the moment. It is not a state to be safely entered into with doubtful feelings, with half a heart. I thought it my duty as a friend, and older than yourself, to say thus much to you. But do not imagine that I want to influence you. You've already been influenced here, you twit.
Yes.
Honestly, I really do.
Let's not imagine that.
Yeah, I really do think that if Miss Woodhouse had not already given her decided opinions on how unsuitable Mr. Martin was, Harriet would have said yes in an instant.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think is supposed to be.
The only reason she's questioning it all is because Emma has taken pains to make her think that the Martins are unsuitable.
Yeah, and that she deserves better. Oh, no, I am sure you are a great deal too kind to, but if you would just advise me what I had best do. No, I do not mean that. As you say, one's mind ought to be quite made up. One should not be hesitating. It is a very serious thing. It will be safer to say no, perhaps. Do you think I had better say no?
Tell me how to live my life.
Like, I definitely agree with you, but yes, I should. Please just tell me what to do. Yes, you're not telling me what to do, but you are telling me what to do, right? Yes, I should not accept him. Like waiting for Emma to nod.
Oh God.
Not for the world, said Emma, smiling graciously. Would I advise you either way? You must be the best judge of your own happiness. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person, if you think him the most agreeable man you have ever been in company with, why should you hesitate? You blush, Harriet. Does anybody else occur to you at this moment under such a definition? Harriet, do not deceive yourself. Do not be run away by gratitude and compassion. At this moment, whom are you thinking of? And is it Mr. Elton? The symptoms were favorable. Instead of answering, Harriet turned away confused and stood thoughtfully by the fire, and though the letter was still in her hand, it was now mechanically twisted about without regard. Emma waited the result with some impatience, and not without strong hopes. At last, with some hesitation, Harriet said, Miss Woodhouse, as you will not give me your opinion, I must do as well as I can by myself, and I have now quite determined, and really almost made up my mind, to refuse Mr. Martin. Do you think I am right? She can't stop asking. Perfectly right, my dear Harriet. You are doing just what you ought. While you were at all in suspense, I kept my feelings to myself.
Yes,
But now that you are so completely decided, I have no hesitation in approving. Oh my God. My arm is not long enough for the jerk-off motion that is in my soul. I have no hesitation in approving. Dear Harriet, I give myself joy of this. It would have grieved me to lose your acquaintance, which must have been the consequence of your marrying Mr. Martin. While you were in the smallest degree wavering, I said nothing about it, because I would not influence. But it would have been the loss of a friend to me. I could have not visited Mrs. Robert Martin of Abbey Mill Farm. Now I am secure of you forever.
Oh my God.
She just says it. She doesn't
awful.
even try to hide it.
Yeah.
Harriet had not surmised her own danger, but the idea of it struck her forcibly. You could not have visited me, she cried, looking aghast. No, to be sure you could not, but I never thought of that before. That would have been too dreadful. What an escape. Dear Miss Woodhouse, I would not give up the pleasure and honor of being intimate with you for anything in the world. Indeed, Harriet, it would have been a severe pang to lose you, but it must have been. You would have thrown yourself out of all good society. I must have given you up.
Oh my God.
Oh, wow. There are parts of this book that are hard to read because Emma is so awful.
First of all, it's not even true what she's saying. She's just like digging the knife in.
No, she's hammering it home.
Yeah.
She pretended to be she influenced her right up until the point until she asked for advice. Then she said, I couldn't possibly give you advice. Yeah. And then the second it seemed like she had kind of made up her mind, she immediately lays on all of the reasons, all of the influence and guilt and control to make sure she stays firm in her decision, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Dear me, how could I ever have borne it? It would have killed me never to come to Hartfield any more. Dear affectionate creature, you banished to Abbey Mill Farm, you confined to the society of the illiterate and vulgar all your life. You just said his letter was really well written. Illiterate.
Apparently illiterate means something else. It means like not well read.
Well, but that's the thing is like everything that Harriet says about the Mrs. Martin and Robert indicate that they're actually much better read than Emma thinks they are.
Yeah.
And much better educated.
Yeah.
The girls went to the same school that Harriet did. They are just as well educated as she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emma just has this idea that Harriet is the daughter of a gentleman.
Yeah.
And therefore, she must just inherently be better.
Yeah.
Which at least she learns
and she has these
later, but
ideas about farmers, apparently.
Oh gosh,
like working class people.
So classist.
She is very
gross.
Yeah.
Like Pride and Prejudice is like, hey, don't be classist against people who are technically also gentle people. They're just like slightly poorer than you. And this book is like, actually, don't be classist against anybody. Yeah. Farmers are also fine.
Yeah.
As long as they're well read and well spoken. So maybe she wasn't completely.
Yeah, we don't really see a lot of different classes in Pride and Prejudice. Like it's primarily within one class with like a little bit of touching upper class, but like we don't really hear about. We see the servants sometimes, but not very much.
Oh no, yeah, no, we don't learn anything. Hill barely actually gets to speak. She just exists.
Yeah, she's really the only working class person that we hear from. Well,
we don't hear from
the maid
her.
Only Lambton.
Oh, yeah. But it's only them talking about their betters, right?
Oh, yes.
Even that line in the miniseries about, my elder brother is an undergardener there. Like, that's not in the book.
Right, yeah.
It's a piece of little personal information that they, like, Jane Austen might never have considered allowing a servant to say.
Yeah.
Anyway. I wonder how the young man could have the assurance to ask for it. He must have a very good opinion of himself. I do not think he is conceited either in general, said Harriet, her conscience opposing such censure. At least he is very good-natured, and I always feel much obliged to him and have a great regard for, but that is quite a different thing from, and though he may like me, it does not follow that I should, and certainly I must confess that since my visiting here, I have seen people And if one comes to compare them, person and manners, there is no comparison at all. One is so very handsome and agreeable. However, I do really think Mr. Martin a very amiable young man, and have a great opinion of him, and his being so much attached to me, and his writing such a letter. But as to leaving you, it is what I would not do under any consideration. Thank you, my own sweet little friend. We will not be parted. A woman is not to marry a man merely because she is asked, or because he is attached to her, and can write a tolerable letter. Oh, no, and it is but a short letter, too. Emma felt the bad taste of her friend, but let it pass with a very true, and it would be a small consolation to her, for the clownish manner which might be offending her every hour of the day, to know that her husband could write a good letter.
I don't understand.
I feel like I lost track of what that was, because it has those fake quotes around it, but then it's not in the first person.
Oh.
And it would be, let it pass with a very true, and it would be a small consolation to her for the clownish manner which might be offending her for every hour of the day, to know her husband could write a good letter. I guess she was trying to say, like, oh yeah, that would have been a real consolation to you if you had married him, that he could write a good letter.
Yeah,
I think that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh yes, very. Nobody cares for a letter. The thing is, to be always happy with pleasant companions. I am quite determined to refuse him. But how shall I do? What shall I say? Emma assured her there would be no difficulty in the answer, and advised its being written directly, which was agreed to, in the hope of her assistance. And though Emma continued to protest against any assistance being wanted, it was in fact given in the formation of every sentence. The looking over his letter again, in replying to it, had such a softening tendency that it was particularly necessary to brace her up with a few decisive expressions. And she was so very much concerned at the idea of making him unhappy, and thought so much of what his mother and sisters would think and say, and was so anxious that they should not fancy her ungrateful, that Emma believed if the young man had come in her way at that moment, he would have been accepted after all. This letter, however, was written and sealed and sent. The business was finished, and Harriet safe. She was rather low all the evening, but Emma could allow for her amiable regrets, and sometimes relieved them by speaking of her own affection, sometimes by bringing forward the idea of Mr. Elton. I shall never be invited to Abbey Mill again, was said in a rather sorrowful tone. Nor, if you are, could I ever bear to part with you, my Harriet. You are a great deal too necessary at Hartfield to be spared to Abbey Mill. I need you by my side every second of the day. You can't have any other friends.
I know, right?
And I'm sure I should never want to go there, for I am never happy but at Hartfield. Some time afterwards it was, I think Mrs. Scudder would be very much surprised if she knew what had happened. I am sure Miss Nash would, for Miss Nash thinks her own sister very well married, and it is only a linen draper. One should be sorry to see greater pride or refinement in the teacher of a school, Harriet. I dare say Miss Nash would envy you such an opportunity as this of being married. Even this conquest would appear valuable in her eyes. As to anything superior for you, I suppose she is quite in the dark. The attentions of a certain person can hardly be among the tittle-tattle at Highbury yet. Hitherto I fancy you and I are the only people to whom his looks and manners have explained themselves. Harriet blushed and smiled, and said something about wondering that people should like her so much. The idea of Mr. Elton was certainly cheering, but still, after a time, she was tender-hearted again towards the rejected Mr. Martin. Now he has got my letter, she said softly. I wonder what they are all doing, whether his sisters know. If he is unhappy, they will be unhappy too. I hope he will not mind it so very much. Let me think of those among our absent friends who are more cheerfully. Let us think of those among our absent friends who are more cheerfully employed, cried Emma. At this moment, perhaps, Mr. Elton is showing your picture to his mother and sisters, telling you how much more beautiful is the original, and after being asked for it 5 or 6 times, allowing them to hear your name, your own dear name. My picture! But he has left my picture in Bond Street. Has he so? Then I know nothing of Mr. Elton. No, my dear little modest Harriet, depend upon it. The picture will not be in Bond Street till just before he mounts his horse tomorrow. It is his companion all this evening, his solace, his delight. It opens his designs to his family. It introduces you among them. It diffuses through the party the pleasantest feelings of our nature, eager curiosity and warm prepossession. How cheerful, how animated, how suspicious, how busy their imaginations all are. Harriet smiled again, and her smiles grew stronger. I'll show you the picture of Mr. Elton. The theoretical scene of Mr. Elton showing Harriet's picture to his mother and sisters, which I suppose he might have done to show them how talented Miss Woodhouse is.
Yeah.
I suppose it might have happened, but at this point it is mere conjecture.
Yes.
All right, let's see. What time is it? I forgot to set the timer again. Oh, but the YouTube is accurate. Okay, 45 minutes. Let's see. Shall I read chapter 8? How long is chapter 8?
How long is it and how long of a video do you want to do?
Right. Chapter 8 is rather on the long side, so I think I will wrap up today with that thought. Mr. Elton showing her picture to all his family. And we will start again tomorrow, again around 6 p.m. Today I was only 10 minutes late starting. That's an improvement on the previous 2 days. And we will start again with chapter 8. Go forward from there. Thank you for watching. Thank you to everyone who sees this after the fact. There's in the description, there are links to all the rest of my stuff. My website and my music and the audiobook that I recently released. If you like listening to me say fiction out loud, you could hear me do one that's a story that I actually wrote. It's available for streaming on my Bandcamp if you're not in a position to spend money on such frivolities as audiobooks right now, or you can download it if you're into that. So go ahead and check that out. I'm just doing this for fun, but there is also a link down there to my payment options if you want to show me a little appreciation for this delightful content I'm providing. I don't know. It's just delightful. sarahshay.com/tips if you want to get all that information in one place. And then sarahshay.bandcamp.com to check out the audiobook and all of my music. So I will see you all tomorrow.
Anon.
I shall see you anon.
Yes.
Oh,